Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 64, recording on Wednesday, March 5th. Appreciate you guys being here. It's a busy time. This is going to be a busy next week with free agency forthcoming, a lot of the Sam Darnold conversation. So stay with us. Going to have a guest today. His name is Judd Zulgad. If you're familiar with Purple Daily or you followed the Vikings over the years, you probably know Judd. He's phenomenal. Always enjoy getting to catch up with him, whether it's at the field or training camp, media room stuff, and appreciate how sharp he is with how he thinks about a lot of these machinations. He's also done the job of reporting, of being inside the buildings, of being in Indy at the combine. So it's always fun. As always, this show is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the local area. I was actually over at my branch on Washington near Trader Joe's earlier today. I saw the folks that I talk to you guys about all the time. Christy at the front desk. Told her how excited I was to see her and talk with her about free agency. Tim Siegley, who runs the thing, Charlie Anderson, Aaron Siegley, who do a really good job with their platform. I mean, really easy to sign up and set up an account. Great, it's a sleek platform that highly recommend for those of you trying to set up an account in the local area. So check them out, First Resource Bank. And if you've missed it, got some stuff over at The Athletic. Had a story early this week in terms of what I heard at the combine. A lot of nuggets in there that should give you a perspective on what's bound to happen over the next week. And then we'll have some stuff later in the week. I think we're doing another mock draft, so got some names over there. Probably do a trade back, draft a running back pretty high, and so you can go check that out. And then going to have one more show for you guys this week. We usually do 2 a week. This will be the third because I have a connection with someone I work with that I think will give us a good perspective going into free agency. So stay tuned for that. Without further ado, we'll hop into Judd Zulgad. If you're new watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us out a ton. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, you can rate and review, and that stuff helps us out too. But we're rolling here in the off season, and a lot more shows to come both next week and leading all the way up to the draft. This is episode 64 of the Alec Lewis Show. Hope you guys enjoy the conversation with Judd Zulgad. All right, Judd, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, man?
I'm good. It was a wild week in Indy. I really want to start. I went to a Wild game Sunday. I could not believe, and we joke about hockey and we have before, but I mean Matt Boldy, way more talented than I knew. This guy's good.
Oh, no, he's really good. He's really good. Now he does have the occasional game where he does not apply himself. Like they won a game in Seattle on Tuesday night in which he really didn't show up. But when he shows up, and he is a talented, he's a big guy, so he's physically good, but he's also skilled. But he's the type of guy who you got to be careful because you'll get enthralled and then he won't give a full effort and it can get maddening. But yes, when he's going like he can, he's a really good player.
Well, that's probably the thing. It's like he stood out to me, but the more I watch him, the more the frustration would settle in. But as the elite hockey mind that I am,
no question about it.
I'll weed through that probably over the course of time. I'll start you with this, and we'll hit all of the big subjects, and I know you've probably talked about this and as much as I have and written about it, but I'll start general. Like, what is your take with where things are with the Sam Darnold situation, both from how you viewed it from afar or what you know? Like, what is your general take about this right now?
My general take is I have actually, while I have consumed all of the reports and all of the information that's out there from various people in the know, and clearly they're talking to sources, my general take right now is I have largely tuned it out because it's so wildly all over the map. A few weeks ago he was going to get $50 million, and now he's not worth $30 million, and the Vikings are interested, but it makes no sense because if they're going to pivot to McCarthy, what sense does it make for Darnold to come back for less and probably get benched at some point in time? So I'm going to go with what I have thought this entire time, which is he's gone. He's going to go get, I'm not saying he's going to break the bank, but he's going to get a very nice payday, probably 3-year contract somewhere, get a chance to start. If he succeeds, that's awesome. If he fails, okay, but he still got paid. But I have such a hard time wrapping my head around him coming back here because one, I can't believe his representatives would allow that because it's not going to be a long-term contract. And two, I mean, he literally would put himself in the jackpot of if JJ McCarthy plays well in training camp, Alec, he's going to be benched. So like this is one case where I've almost like pushed away from the table of information and because so much of it does not make sense or does not compute.
Yeah,
at least in my brain.
No, I think that's very fair. I mean, the way I've thought about it is like it's pretty simple, and you know this because you've watched the Kwesi Adofo-Mensah press conferences and you've heard the way they've talked. But essentially, they want to maximize this roster, and to do that while paying a quarterback X million dollars beyond probably what you would want to pay. I mean, they've said it before internally. Like you either are on the rookie contract that allows you spending everywhere else, or you're paying for a superhero type of guy. And Sam Darnold, as we've all seen, is not that type of guy. Now, the question that I would ask is, let's say Sam Darnold's market is more depressed than maybe expectation was a month ago. And let's say it's Sam Darnold around 25 million versus a Daniel Jones and JJ McCarthy pairing with Daniel Jones being around 15 million. Does any part of that change your calculus?
No, because you drafted McCarthy as the first in franchise history, and this franchise goes back to 1961. First top 10 quarterback you've ever drafted, and you're telling me that now you're going to bring Darnold in, and so what? So A, are you going to trade McCarthy? I don't think so. So B, are you going to have McCarthy and Darnold compete? And that goes back to my point of what's the win there? If Darnold doesn't win the job, the Vikings are, let's just go with what you said, hypothetically paying $25 million for a guy to sit on the bench. And meanwhile, Darnold, if he gets benched, his value is plummeting. So now, let's say he signed a 1-year contract. Well, what's the contract for 2026? So no, it doesn't. The only thing I can come back to sort of make this make sense is this feels incredibly like Kirk Cousins a year ago.
Yeah.
Where there was this large faction of fans and I think people in our business saying, what are the Vikings going to do? If Kirk Cousins leaves, they are screwed, right? And the Vikings very much were like, yeah, we'd love Kirk back. And the whole time it was just sort of this walk up to the ledge of here's how, from the Vikings perspective, here's how we're going to break up. It feels like that again. And this continuing theme of, hey, we want Sam back, we want Kirk back, I think very possibly is partially driven by O'Connell because he really likes these guys. And I think he feels that this notion values them. And, there's quite the chance, too, that the Vikings are trying to at least partially drive Darnold's market value a little bit for the compensatory pick thing as well. So, the only thing I can sort out through this is that there's a lot of underlying factors, but none of them to me make sense with Darnold in training camp on day one at TCO.
I think that's probably the right way to view it. And I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine. He's like, just can you imagine? Okay, fine. Let's say they do bring back Sam for 25 or less, and let's say he does win a competition in training camp, and let's say week 1 he throws 3 picks. I mean, can you imagine the deafening response or the questions? I mean, it really, to your point, if you're Sam Darnold's representatives, it is hard to imagine that being a fruitful scenario. Now, I will also say, if the competitor in the market is the Giants and you are Sam Darnold's representatives, you probably don't look at that as the most fruitful scenario either, considering that executive and that head coach could be gone by November or September, whenever, if they don't perform well. I'm glad you mentioned the comp pick there because I know there was a lot of talk about the tag and trade, and obviously the tag did not happen. But, if I were to tell you or someone with the team were to present to you that rather than tagging and trading him for a 5th or a 6th, they're gunning for a 3rd round comp for next year. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, because I do think I think the tag and trade, and you can tell me since you attended the combine, I do think it was explored thoroughly. So like there's some folks who are like, that was never a possibility. The Vikings were never doing that. I would disagree. They needed to do their due diligence, and if that made sense, but you also came to a point where to work a tag and trade in this sense with a player who is not seen as a hostile, it's one thing if it's a hostile situation where the guy hates you, you hate the guy, you tag him, you all want a divorce. This is very, I think, kumbaya.
Yes.
So
yes.
I think it was discussed. I think the Vikings found out that probably the Darnold camp was like, I don't know about that. I think the Vikings might have found out, to use your term, that the market was probably a little bit more depressed than they expected. But if you get a third-round comp pick in 2026, no, it's not as good as immediate help in the 2025 draft, which, by the way, from a pick standpoint, the Vikings do need and would like. But that being said, that's a pretty good pick. Like, I would feel if at the end of the day I turned Sam Darnold into a third-round pick of any sort, I'm feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, and let's be very clear. To be able to, get that third-round comp pick, not only would you have to assign for a certain amount of money, but the way they would have to navigate this next week would have to be very sharp in terms of where they're finding value, if it's the cut market, how much they're spending, who they're bringing back. These are formulas, calculations that, that's a Rob Brzezinski equation. That's an Emily Battis equation. That goes to levels that my journalism degree does not allow me to rise to. But I'll segue and use that because I do think this free agency period is going to be pretty fascinating. I've had conversations with friends where I've asked them, who are Vikings fans, huge Vikings fans, what makes this satisfactory to you? If we get through the next week and they've done this, what do you feel like becomes a satisfactory amount of additions in what specific spots and what levels of player?
Well, let's start off with the most obvious of ones, Alec, and that is the interior of both lines. You got to get a guard. You have to get a guard. I actually wouldn't object to signing 2 guards or 2 interior guys on the offensive line. Now, do I think that they're going to spend a ton on both? No. But what would strike me as being a satisfactory answer to your question is at least a guard who is going to step in day one and start. It's time for the Vikings to get past this, we'll fix it. And I think O'Connell's finally at his breaking point.
Yeah.
This team has not invested sufficiently since Steve Hutchinson at guard, and that was 2006. And interior defensive line. Now the catch there is this draft very deep on defensive tackles. So could they go that route in the draft? Yes, they absolutely could. But I think you have to at least one of those 2 spots, if not both, interior defensive line and offensive line, have to be addressed because we all watched the playoffs. Kevin O'Connell watched the playoffs. This team was, and one thing I've brought up on occasion that doesn't get talked about, in my opinion, enough, which is Kevin O'Connell ran in 2024 a tougher training camp. And Alec, if you recall, this team started off pretty tough, pretty smash mouth. That Texans game early on here, I thought was the San Fran game. I remember the day after that, O'Connell looked like he was exhausted, like he had played. That waned a bit, which by the time you got to the Detroit game and the Rams playoff loss, it was entirely gone. Like you got your ass kicked. And not just on the scoreboard. You got your butt kicked physically. And so I think part of the problem was you couldn't, you started with a tone, but a tone can only take you so far. You need the horses. And they didn't have those. And that starts interior line. So if they don't address guard and interior defensive line in some way, shape, or form, I think it's a big, big miss for them.
Yeah, what I would say from, the folks listening to this, I think the expectation should be that they added both spots. And again, and that will happen. Yeah. I expect that to happen in free agency. Now, again, is it Milton Williams in the top of the guard market for both? And they're also signing DJ Reed. I think that's very, I wouldn't expect that. But I do think I give this front office credit in the sense that they can be pretty creative in terms of where they find value in certain spots. And I think, to your point, the interior of the defensive line in this draft is highly regarded. You talk to any draft analyst in Indy, it came up every time. Running back and interior defensive line, these spots in this draft are very good. But I also think Brian Flores, with what he seeks at interior defensive line, it is not the nose tackle 340-pound type of guy. He wants guys who can wiggle, who can rush the passer, and I think there is a strong belief that his scheme can do a lot to stop the run. And so I think that only adds to the creativity that they could deploy in terms of how they try to target that interior defensive line avenue. I will say, you mentioned 2006 with Hutchinson. You were covering the team in 2006, right? Like, how long did you cover the team at that point?
I covered him from 2005 through 2010 for the Strip.
Okay. 2006. So I couldn't tell you anything about the 2006 Vikings.
So 6 was Childress's first year. And Brad came in and said exactly what O'Connell finally said after the Rams game, which is, we're going to win up front. Like, we have to win up front. And the Vikings went and signed Hutchinson, who of course now is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, to a 7-year, $49 million contract. And that's a guard in 2006. That was one of the first times a guard got paid, okay? And Hutch came here, and first of all, he was a snarly SOB, which I loved. Like, he was mean. Like, good and mean. That's a great combination. And he immediately lifted the entire line. Bryant McKinney was I don't think he was an especially dedicated player at left tackle, but physically gifted. And the left side of that line, Alec, became a monster. Like, it was fantastic. And that's what you need. You need a guard who just basically goes into every game just ornery as hell and wants to kick butt. And the Vikings, just for like the last, I don't know, take your pick, was it like 15 years or so, have just sort of gotten by. And this whole notion that, well, you can just, you'll just draft one in the 5th round, or you'll just do this or that, is flawed. Unless O'Connell has had a change of heart or was not being truthful, and I think he was, I thought his comments to Mark Craig of the Star Tribune's questions after the Rams game,
no question,
I've had it up to here. And look, the run game too, right? Like, we can talk about the run game. Aaron Jones banged up. Yeah, that's all true. There have been disappointments there, but the reality is this: that run game is in large. I mean, the red zone problems, inexcusable.
Can't run on the red zone at all.
Line.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a like we have now seen enough guys that can't do that I think we can all safely say the interior of your offensive line, unfortunately, is soft. And because they're soft, that's why you cannot do diddly squat in the red zone, where if you watch teams, that's where you got to punish people, man.
Yeah, that's the mauling zone. I mean, the red zone, it really is. It's
funny. I love that.
In 2022, Ezra, it's just been, I've only been here 3 years, right? So in this regime, but 22, you have Ezra Cleveland, Garrett Bradbury, Ed Ingram. Then you trade Ezra Cleveland, it's Dalton Reisner, Garrett Bradbury, Ed Ingram. Then we're going to go Blake Brandel, Garrett Bradbury, Ed Ingram. We're going to move Reisner in at right guard. Brandel struggles. They signed Josh Oliver. They've done run. I mean, they've done everything you could possibly do besides let's just upgrade the level of these spots. And Blake Brandel, I thought, honestly, early in the season, he seems serviceable enough. Now, that probably is the case when you're playing next to Christian Darrisaw, and I think that absence just provided more of a glaring aspect of what that interior really looked like without a superhuman left tackle in Darrisaw.
Yeah. The loss of Darrisaw was enormous. So I give them credit because the trade for Cam Robinson was a very nice trade. Like you went out because like the option was, should we slide Brandel out to the left tackle and should we do this at left, and that would have been Reisner at left guard and Ingram stays put at right guard. And that, in my opinion, would have been disastrous. Cam Robinson came in and played well. And Kwesi gets a lot of credit, in my opinion, for immediately saying we're not going to move guys around. That being said, very few people are Christian Darrisaw. And so, yes, I think the entire line suffered. But it's just time to fix it. It's time to fix that. And the defensive tackle thing, to me, the fix there is, within the last, 10 years, 8 years or so, we have seen those positions shift so much to guys who are basically defensive ends who've got this special skill and play inside, and they're expensive as hell too, but they're worth it. Like, we see the guys who are good there. All these guys, when we talk about, oh man, Garrett Bradbury got his butt kicked, right? Like on Mondays, if we're talking about Bradbury got tossed around, he's being tossed around by these incredible players. And the Vikings, God bless them, have some beef there, but they don't have a guy like that. So like, that's where, if you want to win a Super Bowl, you have to be far more mean and talented in the interior lines. And this team just was not. But that's why I talked about, it's like O'Connell set a tone in training camp that I really, really liked. Yeah. And the season started and they had it. And then it just sort of started to wane. And by the time you got to the last game at Detroit, I just thought physically, again, at some very key matchups, they were getting their butts kicked.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a great point. I do remember the emphasis that they made. I think I remember the very first press conference. I could probably go find that of the season in training camp, and them talking about wanting it to be more physical, and Flores was going to be fit, and that was just the idea. And I don't know if it's the guy just got worn down because they played so many snaps. I don't know if it just the nature of the season took a toll and how much they had to kind of fight, but there's no question. And it's interesting because, and you know this because you talk about it every day, but you hear people like, why is it that they finally realize this? Well, I think at some point, it just hits you in the forehead, and you have no argument against it. But I also say, like, it's not like last offseason they had unlimited money to both revamp the defense and find players on both fronts. So now they have the available spending to be able to do it, and it's just pretty obvious, both in talking to people internally and in just watching it from the outside, that it needs to happen without question. You mentioned Kwesi, and I've thought about him a lot. Obviously, the extension has not happened yet. You guys talk about him a lot as well, but where are you in just how you feel about the job he's done through 3 seasons?
I'm very mixed because I do think he's done a lot of good things. Whoever is, so just to back up, my point, and this is not putting him down at all, okay? But I will say this. None of us know, and we don't get access. None of us know how the Vikings really run. Because Kwesi is not your traditional GM. He's just not. He's not a football guy with a scouting background, right? And like we can say, oh, the draft, that's on him, and the free agents are on him. So he oversees a department in the way that he does it, which I don't fully get, but I mean, it's definitely driven by advanced metrics and things like that. And, whoever, and he gets credit because he's the boss, but, their free agency last year, and you're right, it wasn't like it was, oh man, we got $100 million. Their free agency and whoever was their pro personnel department on that one, I think, in my opinion, put together the best ever Vikings free agency class. Now, there have been great players, but I'm saying if you look at the contributions, Van Ginkel, Grenard, let's just go through the whole thing, right? Like
Cashman, Darnold, it's absurd.
Yeah. It's stupid, right? And the Darnold one, we can say, okay, that was a surprise. But I mean, I guarantee you that when Flores said, I like Cashman, like he was like, I'm plugging him in. Like that was not a fluke. And that also goes to coaching. But anyway, Kwesi gets credit for that. And that was a great free agent class. The drafts have been spotty. The 2022 draft, which is a weird one, but it's been terrible.
Yeah, spotty would be the nicest phrase I would ever heard of. Yes. That one specifically.
Well, yeah, the 22 draft's a disaster, but like the 23 draft, there's still like production there, some production, and the 20, in last year's draft, we can't know for sure. But the point is, that's where it's been a little bit like, okay, some really good, some bad, and when you go back to, I mean, the one common theme, the underlying theme of what we're talking about is you wouldn't have to be looking at going and signing a guard, and this goes back to Spielman too, if that had been addressed correctly. It just never was. defensive tackle. I don't think they've drafted a defensive tackle in the first round since Sharif Floyd.
That's correct. 2013.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, what I would say is Kwesi definitely gets some credit for some very good pro personnel moves. Again, the Cam Robinson trade, in my opinion, with where that team was a great trade. Like, you went out and got a starting caliber left tackle. That was really impressive. The amateur stuff, the college stuff, certainly is not where you would like, both in quality and, quite frankly, in the depth as well.
Right. It is so difficult to try to litigate. I mean, even like a free agency, to your point. I mean, how much involvement is the coaching staff? How much involvement is the pro personnel? How much involvement is the people doing the conversations with the agents? Rob Brzezinski. I mean, there's a lot of dynamics that are ongoing with it that play a factor in producing a free agent class like that. So I understand. I mean, that it is very hard, but I just wanted to ask you because it's interesting to me. I mean, here's a guy who, I mean, let's face it, to your point, did not come through a scouting background. Yes, he had been in buildings before, but I mean, that type of leadership position, for a group of staffers in the Vikings building that is mostly intact from the Rick Spielman era, so you're coming into a building with a bunch of staffers who are used to doing it a certain way. I mean, it is a complicated dynamic from the outset, and it's just been, I mean, the salary cap is where it is because of decisions they made. I do think they've moved off of certain players for the most part at a solid amount of time. Like even Grenard, thinking ahead about age and what he could offer. It's like sometimes there are really good ideas. Other times the draft misses just weigh so heavily, I think, in people's minds during the analysis that it makes it very difficult. But he's a very interesting case to evaluate.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I think the most intriguing thing is we don't know how he operates. Like we just don't know. Like you would literally need to get access to the building and watch him, because that a guy like Spielman was a football guy, right? He was going out and scouting games, grinding film. I guess my question is, and I'm sure what's changed too, and it is interesting that Kwesi does not have a contract extension yet. I find that to be a very intriguing standpoint from the fact that, it's like, okay, I believe your coach got his contract extension 2 months ago. You still have not. And I'm sure there is an ebb and flow and an evolution on O'Connell as well, right? Like, I'm sure Kevin O'Connell's doing more and certainly different things than the day that he walked in the door in February of 2022. So, like, the way that the Vikings run, here's one for you, Ryan Grigson. Like he's their football executive guy. How much is he is he evaluating things? I mean, I do think that Flores' evaluation of film on the free agent class from his end certainly played a huge role.
No question.
Impressive. But one of the most damning things too, and it worked, but it's still not great, was when you look at the Vikings being one of the oldest rosters last season. Because, like, the whole thing when those guys came in was to make changes, get younger, right? Well, they made changes, but they didn't, and the Kyrie Jackson tragedy plays a role for sure. No question about that. Blackman got hurt the first day of camp.
Yeah.
That plays a role. So, like, there's some of it where you actually went out and signed guys and it was productive because your hand was forced. But I guarantee you, they had no, inkling to say, I hope we're an old team. I hope we're an old roster. So there's just a lot of things here. I do think that the future is bright, which is also why I think it's time to move on to McCarthy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the interesting, it's like Kwesi's tagline the first year was competitive rebuild, and they've been much more competitive than they've been the rebuild. But then again, to your point, if McCarthy does hit, if Dallas Turner does develop, then you have serious points to anchor on moving forward. I will say, I mean, you mentioned Grigson, but just hearing things, I do think he really liked Sam Darnold. Just behind it, he really liked Sam Darnold. And I think there was I remember, and I'll just say this because I remember at the Senior Bowl last year, 2024 Senior Bowl. And I'll never forget. I can literally go to the spot in the bar where I was at. I was talking to an agent, and he's like, it was February, and he's like, I'm telling you, I really think they want to move off Kirk. I think they like Darnold. I've heard even really Grigson likes Darnold. And I remember thinking what? But look, what happened. And that's not to take anything away from Kevin O'Connell. It's just very difficult to parse certain aspects of who's influencing a lot of the decision making. And there's no question. You mentioned Flores. I mean, this guy has a scouting background. He's scouted in New England. He knows exactly, precisely, positively what he wants in every specific player that is brought into his defense. And so you best believe that he has a very large say in the guys that are being targeted on the defensive end. But I'm with you as far as JJ and transitioning. I mean, for me, look, like we could talk about the initial surgery, the second cleanup, and the return from all of that. And I think he has a lot to prove. But you and I were both out there at training camp last year and there at the preseason game. And I remember, I mean, I think conversations we had about how impressed we were. And I can at least speak for myself how maybe I was pretty surprised by the way he was performing those days. So I think it just makes sense in that regard from a transition kind of approach.
Yeah, and I think O'Connell likes Sam too. And Sam was a great story. I mean, he's probably one of the best stories of the 2024 season in the entire league. I mean, there was MVP talk at one time. That's ridiculous. But that being said, Kevin O'Connell, no question about it, drafted McCarthy with the 10th pick. If you get this, if he's right, he's now sitting on potentially basically 4 more years of team control at a relatively cheap price, which now frees you up to go out and sign guys. Like you can't, if you're O'Connell and you're watching the playoffs and you're watching the Commanders, Jaden Daniels, right? Are you telling me that in the back of his mind, he's like, but if I lose Sam, we're in trouble? And I do think part of this whole discussion is because of that, because we had the same discussion, by the way, with less certainty behind him with Kirk, right? Well, the Vikings lose Kirk, they're screwed. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to draft a quarterback. Well, I don't care. They're screwed. And they signed Darnold in March of 2024. And the immediate thing was, well, that guy's a joke. What are they doing? He's going to suck. He's going to be terrible. So, that's where I got to think internally, O'Connell and the boys have a very different view. And that doesn't mean they're not going to put Sam down. And I think that they would love to jack his value up as much as possible. All that being said, it feels so much like Kirk because I just remember the refrain of, well, they're screwed if Kirk leaves. Well, guess what? They weren't. And they didn't even have their 10th overall pick. It was Darnold, who a lot of people laughed at, dismissed, and said that's a terrible signing.
Yeah, the two aspects I will say, to expect Kevin O'Connell just to be able to, let's say, with JJ, that it's just going to be perfect. I think that's a little faulty. And also, I will say, I mean, for Kevin specifically, it's a big, I mean, it's a lot of work you got to put in to get a guy like Sam Darnold or a Daniel Jones, for example, to produce at a level that Sam Darnold just did. That takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of responsibility to bear. But that's why you get paid the money that you just got extended to be paid is to be able to do that. Is there, and I'll just end you with this, free agency, non-quarterback, is there one guy that you're just in love with that you're like, man, I just hope they go get that guy?
It's funny because, we all look at the top of the charts, right? We all look at Milton Williams going to come in and save the day, or like previously until he got franchised. Trey Smith, they're going to sign Trey Smith, and then they signed a guy a year ago, Grenard, and we're all like, Jonathan Grenard, oh boy, and then he's great, right? So I can name some names, they're probably not right, but I mean, I think if there's one guy that I really would want, it would be the top of the defensive tackle class, or what's left of, and there are some good ones, the top of the guard class, including the guy that you wrote about from the Colts in your notes.
Will Fries, yeah.
Will Fries, a guy like that who's just going to step in. It doesn't need to be sexy. It just needs to be effective. And this team, when it comes to offensive skill position players, is really good. They're really damn good. So a guy like Will Fries is going to make, and you have to get the run game fixed. So, and I'm no longer going to say, well, you just get the right back. Yeah, you need running backs. I get that. If they can catch passes, that's awesome. That's good. But until you got some more snarl up front, I don't think it's going to change. And the team's inability, as we discussed, in the red zone to move the football is death. It's football death.
Right. Now, would it be nice if Sam Darnold hits passes that were available to him in Detroit? Of course, but to rely on, I mean, when things are moving as fast as they are in that area every time, in that environment, you're just asking way too much to be as an efficient of an offense as I know they want to be. I mean, that's just the reality. Yeah. But I would say this even too. Like, let's say next week happens and they do sign a guard, but it's only one. It's like, really? People are screaming, really? That's all we're going to do? Is it just going to be one guard and that's going to fix? I'd say the draft is there. That will be a priority as well. That's just that's a message that I think is important to pass along depending on what happens. Well, I appreciate it, Judd. It's fun as always, and I'm glad. Yeah, the Darnold stuff, and when the reports are as frequent, it's like they might not tag him per sources. It seems like it's trending. It's just kind of wild how it goes. But you've seen the machinations of the media cycle from when you first started doing it to now, and I just can't imagine what that arc has looked like.
The combine must have been nuts. It must have been crazy.
I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd. And you hear, I mean, you hear people ask you questions, what would you do? And it's like, what would you do? I mean, there's a lot of that. And I'll say that with the Darnold stuff, I mean, there was a lot of like, would you be, if you're a first-time GM and you've waited a decade to get this opportunity, is the first quarterback you're going to hit yourself to Sam Darnold? And that was interesting perspective to have people in the league ask those types of questions. But I think, I mean, we've watched this league for long enough that there will be a team that is willing to pay him and provide him an opportunity, even if it doesn't stick on their cap for multiple years. It won't prevent them from doing stuff in the future. I think that's just the reality. But I've felt comfortable throughout most of the process that a tag and trade was going to be difficult because teams are less likely to part with premium draft capital for players than they have been, and B, the comp pick was always going to be an option. And again, as I've said on this podcast, I think this front office, and I'm speaking about a lot of them, they're very mindful of that type of edge, marginal edge that they can create, that they are mindful of it.
Yeah. And I think they also have, and it's probably wise, it might hurt them business-wise at times, but I think they also have a side to them where they don't want Darnold to leave and say, screw them. Yeah. Like, with Cousins, same thing. Very, very amicable divorces, instead of it being, because the franchise tag is often done in what I would consider to be, as I said, hostile situations, right?
Yeah.
And the Vikings and O'Connell,
And the amiability, affects it. The amiability, the being amicable also affects what players currently in the locker room feel about the organization.
Correct.
In total. So it's not just you want to be amicable with this one guy and his representatives. It's you want the feel of the organization to be what they've built the feel to be. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah,
it's always fun this time of year. It feels like you enjoy it. Do you enjoy it?
Oh, I love it. Are you kidding? It's one of my favorite times of year. This is way more fun than training camp. Way more fun.
The thing is,
I don't enjoy the draft as much, but I love this time of year.
You're out there at training camp tracking kicks every day. I'm like, you're relentless. I give you credit for it, but it's
scouting.
Yeah. I know you're working hard. Thanks for hopping on. Always appreciate it, Judd.
Thanks, man. All right, see you later.
And that'll do it for my conversation with Judd. As always, like I said to him, appreciate him hopping on and giving his time. I know he's busy doing as many shows as he does for Purple Daily on a daily basis. So you can go check them out on YouTube. They're all over the place, but do a good job. And they're locked in. It's a fun show to listen to. So I recommend it. Like I said at the top, if you're new here, please on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, you can rate and review and do all that stuff. Go check out First Resource Bank. If you're looking for branches or a way to sign up, that link is in the description, and go check them out. And then go look at some of the stuff we've got over at The Athletic. It's nonstop stories over there through the end of free agency. We'll have kind of updates all next week in terms of what's going on. So stay in tune to The Athletic. Hope you guys managed the snow apocalypse, which is pretty normal here, but crazy for me as someone from Alabama. I haven't tripped yet, so that's a positive. And yeah, we're going to talk to you guys later this week. Enjoy the rest of your week and appreciate all of you tuning in to the Alec Lewis Show.